Today is week 3 of a series I'm calling the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And again, this is a series that is following, for an outline, a book by the same title, written by John Mark Comer. Can't recommend it enough. Very great book. One of those books that I read every so many years just to remind myself about the concepts in it. And so my goal today, and as it's been the last few weeks, is just really put this idea in your mind, because it's not something we think about, talk about, consider very often. And if you were here the first week, I gave you this. There's two main ideas in this series. The first one is what's normal isn't necessarily healthy. And the second one is hurry is the biggest threat to our spiritual growth. And these things go together, don't they? What's normal isn't necessarily healthy. What does that mean? My kids are homeschool. Any other homeschool families here? Yeah, loud and proud. They're like, homeschool kids aren't normal. Sorry. I'm talking about my own kids. They're not, but I've been more and more okay with that the more that I interact with some other kids that aren't homeschool. Like, I don't know about you, but I saw a post on social media that said, at least my homeschool kids aren't walking around saying 6, 7 every 2 seconds. And I'm thankful for that, because I'm about sick of that nonsense. Maybe not heard these kids saying some weird stuff, but I am glad that my kids were a little bit weird in that regard, because sometimes normal is insanity. And there are a lot of things that we do as a culture that are just normal that aren't healthy at all. And then the second idea, hurry is the biggest threat to our spiritual growth, is a concept that works well with that first statement. That being in a hurry, on the grind, constantly going, filling every second of your day with something is normal, but it's not necessarily healthy. Last week I introduced to you some spiritual disciplines. And remember, this is the definition of discipline that I'm running with. That it's activity that I can do right now by direct effort that will eventually enable me to do that which currently I cannot do by direct effort. And that's a mouthful, but really in essence, I want you to picture lifting weights. That's kind of the standard example of how this plays out, a spiritual discipline. That you may not be able to bench press your body weight yet, but if you bench press what you can bench press right now and do that often, it will lead to the point where you reach that goal. And so we want to think about these spiritual disciplines in that way. And again, here's the 4 of them. I'll probably consider or consolidate the last 2 as we get into some Christmas centered messages. But last week I talked about silence and solitude, and today I'm going to give my whole time to this thought of the Sabbath, and then the next week or 2 weeks we're going to go into simplicity and slowing. So I want to talk about this thing of Sabbath. What is Sabbath? It's not a word that we use often, and frankly, when I think of Sabbath, it feels like old speak for Sunday. And I hate to do this because I've done it before, maybe I'm picking on the cowboy church or whatever, but they have kind of their own version of different things. They have their own little Bible, New Testament, and it's written in vernacular. Vernacular is just language that's local to us, right? So the things we say, or there's ways that we say things that they don't say it that way somewhere else, and we've all experienced this, but they have a cowboy 10 Commandments. Maybe you've come across this before. And it says something like, don't be hankering after your neighbor's stuff. It's kind of like written that way. And the way that they describe Sabbath, it says, get yourself to a Sunday meeting. That's the way it's said. And I'm sorry, but that's not exactly what the Sabbath is about. There's that, maybe, but so much more to it. And so I'm going to jump into this. And I want you to keep in mind as we read this that Sabbath predates the 10 Commandments. That the first mention of Sabbath in Scripture is well before we get the 10 Commandments. So this is in Genesis Chapter 2, so the very beginning of the story, the very beginning of the book that we read, that we so put so much weight onto, starts with this concept. Yet so often, it falls by the wayside for us, doesn't it? And if you read chapter 1 of Genesis, this is the creation account where God is creating the heavens and the earth and the animals and us and all the things. In chapter 2, he gets done with all that in 6 days, and this is what is said. By the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So there's a few things I want to point out as we read through this. The first one being that God blessed the Sabbath. As you read what precedes this, what comes before it, God blesses the animals, he blesses us. And then this is kind of a strange thing to me if you think about it. He's blessing a day. He's blessing a time period. We can wrap our minds around blessing ourselves or, blessing something. But a time period seems a little odd to me. It's a little bit. And when you think about blessing, what is that? What is the blessing of God? We sing this song, it says, Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you. That's weird language, isn't it? But it speaks to God's approval of something, that he's championing it, that he's suggesting it, that it is the approved thing, the approved path, right? And so when you seek the blessing of someone else, you understand what that's like. Back in the day, and I did this, and it felt really awkward, and Dottie's dad was kind of like, why are you asking me? Who cares, dude? But I asked for her hand in marriage. I asked for his blessing over my plans to propose to his daughter. And when you think about blessing, it's very much like that the Lord is blessing an action, a thing, people, animals, etc. And so very much so I want you to think this thought, that God blessed the Sabbath. You're like, I know, we just read that. But think what that means. He not only accepts it, tolerates it, but it's his preferred thing, right? That he blesses it. He's not just saying, well, I guess I'll let you in, even though you're doing this Sabbath thing. He set it up. He put it in motion. And on that note, do you think God really needed to rest on the seventh day? Do you think he was tired after all that creating? Probably not. The God of the universe does not need to take a breath, take a rest, any of that. There is no sort of chink in his armor. There is no point where he is down and has to have a breather. When you picture the God of all, that is not who he is. But it's interesting that this is the pattern that is set before us. There's a lot of things that happen in Scripture that fall in the category of setting an example, of putting in motion a preferred method. When he talks about blessing things, I think a lot about the ministry of Jesus himself, where you read about the prophecy that is fulfilled, where it says he went and he did something to fulfill the prophecy, right? He is putting in motion what was said would happen in the future. And maybe the greatest example of this in my mind, and to this day I have questions about why was Jesus baptized? You ever thought about that? This interaction he has with John the Baptist, the pre-runner, the forerunner, and he shows up and he says, I'm not fit to baptize you. What is this about? And he still does it. And he sets in motion a pattern that is blessed and to be followed. I think the same thing is happening in this situation. I'm taking my liberty with that. But I think God, from the beginning of the story, set in motion, created this pattern that to this day, whether you think God is real or not, you're living in to some extent, right? That any atheist in the world, they may deny God and his existence and creation and call it this is a myth, but they're still living 7 days of the week the same as every other person. Still under that pattern that was set forth so many years ago. And critical scholars would say that, well, the Mesopotamians did that and the Jews kind of followed. It's still in motion. There's 6 days and 1, 6 and 1. I think it was during, I don't remember what time period, but I was reading some history about this, where at some point in time they tried to create a 10-day work week, and we just fell apart. Like we couldn't do it. We couldn't handle it. There's something to this, though. Whether you believe it or not, at the end of the week, you've spent your energy. At the end of a period of time that your productivity is done. There's no more that's going to be accomplished. That we are finite creatures that I believe, through this pattern and elsewhere, that God has created to live at a set pace and rhythm of life. And no matter what technological upgrade we have, how we innovate, how we streamline things, whatever happens, we cannot get away from this principle. And so I want you to just think about that. A lot of times we read through this and don't even think about what is being said here. He created a rhythm at 6 and then 1. And there's a part where it says, let us make man in our image. If God did it like this, we should take our cues from what he's saying. If God made us in his image, it stands to reason that when he sets forward an example, when he blesses a pattern, a specific amount of time, etc., that we should look at this. And when we don't do this, when we fight it, there are consequences. People are constantly trying to go beyond this, but in the end, it's not going to work out for you. If we try to live our lives outside of this cycle of just the week, if this is a thing that it's so ingrained into our day-to-day lives that we don't even really think about it. I mean, you do. You think in terms of weeks, don't you? The same way tonight, if you got little kids, you think, oh man, we got to look and see what's going on in school this week. If you're a meal prepper, when do you do it? Any meal preppers? You don't have to raise your hand. When do you do meal prepping?
Sunday.
Yeah, because you're going into the next cycle of the week. And regardless of where God is in your life, you can't run away from what he set in motion. So what is Sabbath? It's a word, Shabbat, which that's not a word you probably use a lot. That literally means to stop, or it can mean delight. Stop or delight. I think it's kind of both. It's stop and delight. I think that's really the way that this word is set up to be. Shabbat, stop and delight. The way that I would put it to you as Tahlequahnians, is that a word? I don't know how we call ourselves that. It's kind of awkward, but people love Tahlequah in the surrounding areas, that it's rest and worship. When you think about Sabbath, I don't want you to think, get yourself to a Sunday meeting, but rather rest and worship ordained by God in a specific rhythm. And it's not just a day off, but it's a day that's holy unto God. And part of that holy is about provision. There's a passage in Exodus chapter 16, if you want to turn there, I'm going to go through this quickly, where the Israelites are at it again, as they always are. They need direction. They need to be recoursed, if I can say that. They need to be bent back into shape. And they are fresh out of slavery, in some senses of the word. They're wandering around, and God is providing for them sustenance. And so I'm going to pick up through this. This is the story where we get introduced to the term manna, which just means, what is it? I think that's funny that they called it, what is it? They didn't understand what manna was. It was this sort of heavenly bread that came down in the morning on the dew, in the dew of the grass. It was much like coriander seed and honey. I don't know what coriander seed is, but it was a sweet little bread, right? That God miraculously provided to sustain them. And so I'm going to read this a little bit and kind of pick out a few pieces of it. Here's what it says. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? That's what manna is. What is it? For they did not know what it was. Then Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. So here's their instruction on how to interact with this thing that God has put in front of them. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer. I don't know how much that is in today's terminology, but a specific, if you said a quart, go get a quart. You know what that looks like. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Imagine that. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until morning. However, in typical Israelite fashion, they don't obey the rules quite like they ought to. Verse 20, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell gross, right? So Moses was angry with them, which seemed to happen a lot, didn't it? Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. Verse 22. Listen to this. I want you to key in on this part right here. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said to them, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it until morning. So remember, up until this point, the pattern is get what you need for today. If you try to get more than what you need for today, it's going to rot and stink and it's not going to work. So don't even try. But on the sixth day, he's saying gather twice as much as you need. Right? Sixth day, verse 26, you are to gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will not be any. Nevertheless, some of the people went out the seventh day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and instructions? Verse 29, bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the seventh day. No one is to go out. So the people rested on the seventh day. I love this story because I think it speaks to the nature of the Sabbath that we don't really key in on a lot. And that is that God provides for you. Because the biggest sort of rub, the biggest conflict that I encounter when we talk about this subject of Sabbath is just, I don't have enough time. I'm going to lose my house, my car, my what. It's going to sound like the old country song joke back in the 90s or whatever. I'm going to lose all these things. And if you don't do this, then I am not going to be able to keep up with what is coming down the pipe toward me. And I understand that. I also understand that there is a point in time where my productivity is gone. I was thinking about this this morning even as I'm going back through my notes. And it seems like there was a time in my life when I could work about 12 hours and things were getting done. And then anytime over about 12, 13, 14, it was like, depending on the work, not much was happening. Maybe you can relate to this. It didn't matter if I had a boss and they were saying, okay, you got to go get this done or whatever. Come hour 12 of that day, man, I was just snail's pace, just slowing down, wasn't happening. Maybe you can relate to this, to where it seems like you're really productive at a certain period of time and then it just falls off a cliff. I think the same thing is true when you think about and you zoom out and look at your week. That I always have more on my to-do list than gets done. Rarely do I finish the to-do list and think, man, I need to add some more things today. And I'm better off, actually, when I'm realistic about what I can accomplish and then even scale that back some more. The same thing is true as God relates to us. When it says he blesses the Sabbath, part of that is provision. I know this is true because it goes hand in hand, and stick with me because here in a minute I'm foreshadowing where I'm going next. But I'm going to ask you the question, hey, is this a New Testament principle? Is this something we're supposed to be doing, or is it just an Old Testament thing that we read about? Much like the tithe, and I know that rubs some of you the wrong way, that the tithe is very present in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, but we don't see any mention of it at all in the New Testament, beyond what Jesus says to the Pharisees when he says, oh, you should have tithed on this and that and the other too. Not to say that we shouldn't be generous right now, and I talk about tithing all the time, but it's not the same as it was to Israel. I get this. But the same way that when you are faithful to giving a percentage of your income first out of faith, that God blesses that action. And that your not enough becomes more than enough if you're willing to submit to his provision. It's the same thing with your time. You say, time is money. Heard that before? Time is money. I don't believe that's true. I think that time is much more valuable than money. But it stands to reason that the same way God interacts with our money, he interacts with our time. That if you're constantly finding yourself just, I'm slaving away, I don't have any time at all, that if you trust God and do the thing God blesses, you may be surprised at where that leads you. And so I'm just saying, try it out. Don't do anything unwise. We all have to get work done. We all have to accomplish certain things. But you can't be a slave. And that's what this was about in this moment. That these people had to learn how to be human again. And they were so wrapped up in the sins of the past and the bondage of the past that even the very 10 commandments that they were given, these children of Israel, were a freedom like they had never experienced before, because they needed instruction on how to live under God, God's way, in his blessing. So I just want you to consider that. Part of God's blessing in the Sabbath is his provision, if you're willing to honor that. So like I said, here's the question. Is Sabbath part of the new covenant? Oh man. It's interesting, but this is the only 10 commandment that's kind of debated in that light. Have you thought about that? This is the 10 commandment, one of them that gets overlooked more than any other ones. Like if you ask a person on the street, just kind of street interview that, you've seen that style on YouTube shorts and whatnot, TikTok, where people could name a lot of these, but this one about the Sabbath, it seems to get passed over a lot. That we understand, okay, thou shalt not kill. That one stands the test of time, doesn't it? Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. You know, we can look at all those and go, duh. But this thing is Sabbath, you look at it and you kind of go, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure if this is something that is for the new covenant. Because there's part of it that our attraction to it or our distance from it is based in legalism. And I'm going to share a story with you where Jesus confronts that head on. But this is one of those 10 commandments that's debated, the only one in my opinion, as it stands. Is it something that we're doing today? Is it something that we are called to do today? And the simple answer to that is I don't think that you're going to go to hell if you don't practice Sabbath. But life is going to be easier for you if you do lean into this principle of Sabbath. And so that's really what I'm trying to accomplish with this whole series, is just to get you to step back and again ask those two questions. Is what is normal working? Is hurry killing my soul? Do I need to assess the pace of my life? Not that God is going to be angry with you if you don't practice Sabbath, but it's going to go better for you if you're willing to consider the format, the rhythm of life that he's put in front of us, right? And as I said, Jesus was kind of always getting himself in trouble on the Sabbath. It's almost like he made a point to do some things on the Sabbath just to stir the pot. It seems like every instance that we see Jesus interact with people about the Sabbath, his teachings are not very much on this topic, that he's doing things that he was not supposed to do on the Sabbath per the view of the elite, the religious establishment, the religious elite. And in Mark chapter 2, we get a snapshot of that. And Jesus, I wish you would have said more on this topic, but to answer your question, is this a New Testament principle? I just kind of want to look at what Jesus says and frame things through that lens maybe. Here's what it says in Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 23. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. Not something we do often, probably. Sounds pretty gross. I don't know what just a head of grain would taste like. Probably not so good. The Pharisees said to him, they were always around somewhere, weren't they? Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? He answered, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? So he's kind of like a trial lawyer going back to a precedent case, like saying, well, there's historic precedence that this kind of thing has happened before, which was very audacious of him to put himself in the same light as King David, right? Folk hero David, right? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. I wish I had more time to kind of unpack, what's going on there, but what he's saying is, listen, we all know that this has happened before, and he's challenging their authority to frame what it looks like to Sabbath. Sabbath is a verb. Verse 27, then he said to them, the Sabbath, here's his teaching, real quick, real short, but there's a lot that's being said in this. The Sabbath was made for man, not the other way around, not the man for Sabbath. So the Son of Man, and this is a very audacious thing to say, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. This is what they needed to hear. I've talked about this ad nauseum probably, but when you think about the law, the temple system, everything that went around that, it started off in its purest form. Moses gives the 10 Commandments, they give the law, all these things. They kind of reiterate that through the story of Nehemiah and Ezra, if you've been through there recently, and kind of remind the people of what it looks like to interact in God's way and do things the way that God prescribed. But through time, as it goes, things get complicated. They get bureaucratic. Can you relate? I remember, man, I'm going to get myself in trouble. Is Ryan here? Ryan's not here, so I guess we're good. But the building codes, man, that's the way I think about the law. The building codes started out, and it was pretty easy to do what you needed to do. And then as time went on and people got involved with the process, and I'm not sliding any of the people that do that, it got more and more convoluted, more and more complicated. And along the way, there's some things that got put in place that I don't personally agree with, that I say that's way off track of what this was intended to accomplish. This is where Israel was in this moment in time. When Jesus showed up, it was really at the apex of this bureaucratic, this oppressive system that was put upon them that started as freedom, started as something else, started as a frame to live by. And Jesus points this out and says, you lost the plot, man. His two-line teaching is potent, and it's exactly what they need to hear. Now, for us, I would argue that the opposite is true. He still says what we need to hear, but the order is reversed. We don't think about Sabbath at all. For them, it was a legalistic action. They built their house close enough to the temple so they wouldn't disobey the orders that the priests set in motion. And you could argue with some of that. But they were very legalistic about it, the same way that a lot of Jewish people are today, where they won't cook, they won't do certain things, and some of that is prescribed, and I'm not here to, go through that and kind of fine-tooth comb it. But they didn't understand the point of the whole thing. They lost the plot entirely. And so when Jesus says, now listen, here's historical precedent, this is what David did, and don't forget, this thing is not about the legalism of it. It's a gift to the people of Israel who were slaves and are no longer slaves. They're the children of God. You know the thing about slaves, they don't take a day off. We say, oh, I take a day off. Well, your day off is really just running errands and working for yourself most of the time. It's mowing your yard and changing the oil and whatever. Sabbath is something completely different. When he says this, that the Sabbath was made for man, we don't even know what to do with that. The man for Sabbath, that's our context that we think in. Oh, I got to do this. And we used to institute this. We used to have blue laws. We used to have, you couldn't do certain things on Sunday. It was built into our culture, and some of that's good, but it's always about the heart behind it, isn't it? That was Jesus' thing in a nutshell, wasn't it? He said, I didn't come to abolish that stuff. I'm just setting it straight, setting you straight about what it's really about. How it relates to you today, for them it's 2,000 years ago. For us today, we think about this concept 0 times. Sabbath, what is that? Are you Jewish? You're going to Shabbat? Friday night to Saturday evening? Is that what you're doing over here? Not necessarily. It's not about the format. It's about the heart behind it. That you have to understand first that this thing of Sabbath is a gift from God. And Jesus set that in motion. He was talking to a culture, like I said, who had become legalistic. That's not our case in this term, is it? Talking about Sabbath. For us, it's a gift. And here's my message for you today. Incorporate Sabbath into your weekly rhythm. In a nutshell, that's what I'm trying to make you think about right now. And for you, that might look different. For me, it's not when it's supposed to be. I've got friends on that note who are Seventh-day Adventists. Any Seventh-day Adventist people before I start offending you? They're weirdos. I love them to death, but they're weird. They are so keyed in on to a specific time and day. It better be like this and, whatever. And I heard a statistic actually inside of this book that I'm, basing the series off of, that Seventh-day Adventist people live on average a decade longer than the rest of us. And I personally don't think it's because of this Sabbath thing. I think it's because they don't drink caffeine and they don't eat bacon, which I don't know about you, but I'm willing to probably lose a few years just to be able to, it's about quality of life and not quantity of life sometimes maybe. But I have some Seventh-day Adventist friends who are very legalistic about how they do this. And the way they do it is the only way in their view, right? If you've ever been part of Seventh-day Adventists, they're very loud and proud about Saturday is the right day. If you're doing it on another day, you're messing up. And I personally am okay with us meeting together and having church on Saturday evening and Sunday morning and Wednesday night, and whenever, that component of it. But for me personally, and many others in ministry, I can't truly give a full Sabbath day on today. Like, believe it or not, I am working right now. I know you might not think that or look at it in that manner, but I have been putting a lot of effort and energy and whatever into what I am currently doing right now. Not to say that I don't, do some Sabbath things myself. And at the same time, for me personally, in the season of life that I'm in, For me to think about this what I'm telling you today is to incorporate Sabbath into I'm talking about me, my weekly rhythm looks different right now than it will when I'm in my 50s. It looks different now than it did when I was a lot younger. Because I've got kids of a certain age, because I'm working today. It's not about legalistically doing something where I say, okay, here's exactly what you do. It's really leaning into what Sabbath has been about, to stop and delight. Or as I said, to give you handles, worship and rest. When you think about Sabbath, just ask those two questions. Is this worship? Is it rest? And if it's not, you've got 6 other days of the week to do that. There's a lot of, as I mentioned before, I think there's a lot of parallels between this and generosity in your life. When I try to talk people into being strategically generous, those are my words, tithing or otherwise, whether it's 3% of your income or 98% of your income, being strategic about doing things comes with a blessing. That if you are at a point in your life and you say, man, I have never been busier in my life, and what you're talking about sounds wonderful, but it's just not feasible. What can you do? How can you strategically say, okay, Thursday nights from 8 p.m. to 8:15, I don't know, I hope you have more time than that. But how can I lean into a rhythm of life that is prescribed and blessed by the Father himself, that is given to us as a gift? How can you lean into a moment and say, I am in faith even, like the Israelites saying, okay, you're going to get enough for these 2 days if you just do what I say to do. How can I lean into health by incorporating Sabbath into a weekly rhythm? When we get this command in Exodus chapter 20, it says it this way: remember the Sabbath day. Remember. Step 1, remember. It's hard to remember sometimes. I've had a very busy season of my life. I've been building a house for like a year and a half, which is too long to be building a house, but I'm also pastoring a church, and I have 2 kids, and And there is a lot going on in my life right now, more than I would like to be going on. I know that the pace that I'm living at now is not sustainable. Anybody else feel that way? And the joke is that we lie to ourselves and say, oh, in 2 weeks, everything else, it'll slow down. And then you just keep living at the same speed, the same pace until you die, probably. We've got to break that cycle at some point. Now, there are times when you got to hustle and make it happen and survive and whatever. But it's a death sentence to not stop and remember the Sabbath. That's the first thing, just awareness of it. If we could just, all of us, be aware that we should be doing this, it would gain something in our health. Remember the Sabbath day. How do we do this? By keeping it holy. Well, what's holy? Holy. It's things that aren't just, who cares, right? It's things that are special in a God-ordained sort of way. I'm trying to make this in layman's terms. When God says he made it holy, he's really saying, this is my thing. I made it. You should consider this. You should value this. You should remember the Sabbath day. A little bit later, that's when we get the first version of this command in the 10 Commandments. A little bit later, in Deuteronomy, a generation later, I think it was something like that, we get another version of the same command with a lot more cliff notes under it, or a lot more sort of commentary about what is being said. And I like this version of it better. And I think it's speaking to people that are more along the lines of who we are. That we've heard this, we have a connection to it from our ancestors, however long ago that was. For them, there wasn't a lot of time that passed. But the way this is reiterated, really, I think it gives it some panache, if you will. Here's what it says. This is in Deuteronomy, verse 5, chapter 12. First word's different. Look at this. So before it was remember the Sabbath. Remember, that's an important word. Observe the Sabbath. When you think about observing a day, what does that mean? Well, if you work at a bank, it means we closed, we ain't here, right? When you observe Thanksgiving, what went into that? Well, you didn't just show up. I was watching Garfield's Christmas with my kids the other day. You watch that one in a minute? And John, it's such a strange show because he gets a date on Thanksgiving. Nobody does that. That's weird. He shows up and looks at his recipe book, and it gives him instruction on how to cook a turkey. And the first line says, you need to thaw the thing out 24 hours before you cook it. I think that's what it said in the cartoon. It's like, that doesn't really matter. And so he just throws the frozen turkey into the oven. If you're observing Thanksgiving and you have half a brain, you can't just throw a turkey into the oven. You have to make plans to observe that holiday and do what you do on that holiday, right? It's the same sort of connection, I think, for us. This is a good way to look at the Sabbath, that it is a holiday that we observe, a weekly, reoccurring thing that to observe means different than just, well, we'll see what happens. It means that there is some planning and effort, forethought that goes into observing this day, right? So think about that when you read this. That's why I love this version of it. Observe the Sabbath by keeping it holy. Same thing, little different nuance. As the Lord your God has commanded you, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you should do no work, neither you nor your son. He goes into a lot of detail here, like nobody, not him, not her, not the guy you know across the street. Take this seriously. That's what he's saying. You nor your son, your daughter, your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants rest as you do. Remember, this is key. This is where he really just lands the plane for them. And I'm trying to do the same thing by reading God's Holy Scripture for you. I hope that you haven't fallen asleep yet and you're going to key in on what's about to be read. So pay very close attention. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. He said, no, we weren't. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. You know, Egypt is kind of a metaphorical concept to us. There's a song that we've tried to play as a worship team like 3 or 4 times. It's called Egypt. And it always reminds me of this concept. For whatever reason, every time we play, we're like, man, it just doesn't feel right. But when you think about Egypt, Egypt was so hustle, grind, whatever, that they had store cities. And we kind of relate to that. And don't raise your hand, but let me just ask you this question. Think about it. How many of you have a storage unit somewhere? Don't raise your hand. Just think about it. Or a storage part of your home, a whole room maybe. Maybe you've got a big attic that's like unfinished space, like bonus room kind of thing, and it's got stuff in it, right? Egypt was a very prosperous place that was built on the backs of slave labor. And that's an oversimplification. When you think about Egypt, what do you think about? Pyramids. How did those happen? We don't know. They're marvelous. They're amazing. We are, in some ways, modern day slaves if we don't live under the blessing of God. God said, you don't have to be a slave. Well, but you don't have to be. But my kids you don't have to live in slavery. The strange and sad and sadistic thing is that we choose this without even knowing it. When we live at such a pace of life that it takes off years of our lives, very much like slavery. When we're such a slave to consumerism, and I'm going to talk about that stuff later, and you're like, how does that relate to the Bible? Just trust me, it does. When we forget that we're children of God, we very much need this line. Remember that you were slaves. That is what's going to happen if you continue to do what is normal, but there's something better for you. That the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. These are great like song lyrics from the 90s, right? I think like Brownsville revival songs. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you. Now, we haven't been commanded. It might be easier if we were, but we have not been commanded. But we can still read this and relate to what is being said and how it's being said. Therefore, the Lord God has commanded you to observe, there's that word again, the Sabbath day. Observe. Here's what I want to leave you with. Remember, and I would challenge you to observe. There's a distinction between those two things, isn't there? I'm going to ask our worship team to come up as I close today, but remember is consciousness of mind, isn't it? I remember. Didn't mean I acted upon that thought, but I remembered something. When you observe a day, a period of time, you make plans to do certain things on that day. Now, what does that look like for you? Listen, I don't know. For me, it looks like this. And I don't, honestly, as I preach this to you, I'm convicted about how much room I need to grow in this area of my own life. And there have been times when I've done this way better than I currently am, just to be completely honest with you right now. But for me, this is what it looks like. I try not to do things in a period of time that are outside of rest and worship. And for me, there are some things that I consider rest that you'd be like, that sounds like work. It all really is what it is doing to your soul, isn't it? There are many times that I like to write music. That used to be work for me. I don't do it very often, and so now it's kind of rest. And out of that is worship too, right? It's both things in one. I take a nap. I ignore your phone calls and text messages. Let me be honest with you. And if that's not okay with you, I don't know. I try to think about the fact that I am not a slave and lean into those two things. What is rest? What is worship? I try to just love my kids and hang out, and not think about, not do the pre-work for the work the next day. Well, that's hard to do, I know. And for me, this is usually as soon as we're done here, on into, tomorrow afternoon. We call it Monday Fun Day. In our family, we go and we do just fun stuff. And sometimes we'll have a conversation about church in the car, and I am convicted of the fact that that is not rest, it's work. No offense, I love you all. And that's strange to you because you have no connection to this. For you, it might be, well, on Saturday, we do this thing, and this is the practice we have. I care, but I'm just telling you that you don't have to be legalistic about it because Sabbath was made for the man and not the other way around. The Sabbath police aren't going to show up and say, you're not doing this right, like they were doing in Jesus' day. We are so blessed to have that going on. But you should do it. You should observe. At the very least, I want you to remember it. Step one is remember. If you leave this today and just think, that's an interesting concept, Arlis. I don't know if I'm ready to do it, if ever, but I hear you. This is one of those things that listen to me, God is not going to send you to hell for not practicing Sabbath, but He wishes that you did. There's a lot of things in our life that fall into this category, though. That God's best for you is what He has. He's saying, man, I want to bless your life in this way. I want to offer you something that is not normal, but healthy. I want to offer you something that will take you from the slavery of our day-to-day, just consumerism, North American ways. And I don't know how that sits with you today. Like I said, there are seasons in my life where this is easier to do than others. But I pray that you remember and that you observe.